Welcome everyone to this additional event on political action rooted in discernment, a series that we've been having in the context of, well, it began with the Ontario election and now in the context of the federal election, which is more applicable to people from across Canada, and helping us to be more discerning in these political times of election campaigns. And we are joined tonight by John Milloy, and I'll introduce him in more detail in a bit, but he's coming to speak to us on politics and faith in a polarized world, a more discerning look. We'll just pause now, and we will begin with a land acknowledgement that Tara from Central Oblast will be leading us in. So, Tara, and you feel free to introduce yourself and say a little bit, where you come from, Central Oblast.
For sure. Thanks. So as Trevor said, I'm Tara. I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation in Hull, Quebec. I work at the Centre Oblast as the new director, taking over for Joe Gunn in September, and it's the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Ministry of the Oblates in Canada. So thanks for having me today, and it's good to be a partner with the Jesuit Forum on this topic. So I just want to thank everyone who's present on this online platform and just take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land that we are joining from coast to coast to coast. These are the unceded and ancestral territories of the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people. So this is an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. I just ask you to join me in a brief reflection on the historical and current forms of colonial harm, and to consider how we can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thanks. And if you'd like, I invite you to put in the chat where you're joining from, the territories of the First Peoples that you're joining from. If you're in a new space at the moment or you're not quite sure, just including this little tool that you can look up where the First Peoples that are the traditional land of the First Peoples where you are. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara. And feel free to continue adding if you're looking up your area. I'm sure it's a fascinating fascinating resource actually. And we just want to also acknowledge that Tara joins us from Central Oblast, but we've been organizing this series of political action rooted in discernment with other organizations as well, faith-rooted organizations such as Central Oblast, but the Mary Ward Center, which is an office of the Loretto Sisters in Toronto, the Ministry for Social Justice, Peace and Creation Care, which is a social office with the Sisters of St. Joseph, ORSI, the Office of Religious Congregations for Integral Ecology, Citizens for Public Justice out of Ottawa, Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Toronto, Development and Peace, Catholic Conscience, and others. But these, so we're grateful for our collaboration with one another and spreading the word and working towards social justice in our world, rooted in our faith. Tonight, we will be, as many of you know, so many of you have joined us in past forums. It'll be a two-part event for roughly around 2 hours. The first part will be a presentation of John's insight, John Milloy's insights on our theme for this forum, Politics and Faith in a Polarized World, a More Discerning Look, in the context of our federal election, which is fast approaching. And as you know, this part is being recorded to be put on our website for people to come back to and listen and take part in. And then the second part will be, which is the most of our evening together, will be a small group sharing listening circles on guiding questions, which we'll talk about more in a bit. And this part will not be recorded. And then we will come back prior to our conclusion in a plenary, just to kind of share the graces of our small group conversations based upon the presentation. So that's our evening together. So now I just want to welcome John on his sharing in his wisdom and political experience as a Roman Catholic. John is the assistant professor of public ethics at Martin Luther University in Kitchener-Waterloo. I don't know if it's Kitchener or Waterloo, so I'll just say Kitchener-Waterloo. I forget now. He's director for the Center of Public Ethics. I believe that's at the University of Waterloo. John, I'm sorry for. And John is also a former Ontario MPP, Liberal MPP, and cabinet minister. And he had represented the Kitchener Centre riding from 2003 to 2014. And he served in cabinet in various offices: Minister of Community and Social Services, Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, Minister of Research and Innovation, Minister of Government Services. At a point, he was government house leader as well. John says his political interest began at age 13, where he worked at Queen's Park as a page and continued working in various political offices in both the Ontario provincial and federal level. And from 1997 to 2002, he served as a legislative assistant to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. John has written on politics and faith in book-length reflection with Novalis Press called Politics and Faith in a Polarized World, a Challenge for Catholics. In that resource, we spent a class of my course on integration for ministry this past semester, and the students, both Catholic and non-Catholic, it really resonated with my students as future ministers in their various churches. So it's not just for Catholics, but it's a theme and reflections that resonate with all faith-based peoples and Christians in particular, in the broader sense. He also edited a collection of essays related to faith and politics called Faith and Politics Matters, with reflections by various political experts: Peter Warrion, Scott Klein, Kevin Fian, Jean-Francois Lanier, Mark McGowan. That's also with Novalis. And John also writes for various news outlets, in particular the Hamilton Spectator, Toronto Star. And I just want to say, just share that on March 27th, so not too long ago, in the Hamilton Spectator, John reflected upon the question, should Canadians care about Mark Carney's religion? And in that piece in the Hamilton Spectator, he wrote, I'm quoting John here now, "We live in an age of authenticity where we all seem to want to know what really makes public figures tick. And any religious person will tell you that what makes them tick is their faith. It gives their life meaning and purpose, shapes their values and priorities, and helps them to determine the right course of action. Faith is not something they can slip on and slip off. It's a central part of their identity. And it can be very positive. Amid a climate crisis, Catholicism calls on all of us to defend creation. In a world where the gap between the rich and the poor is growing exponentially, it demands we adopt a spirit of solidarity with those on the margins. And in our polarized society, it calls on us to treat those with different viewpoints with respect and even love. Unquote. So this is what our faith calls us to, but so often we do not see that. And so we invited John to share with us why this is so and how we can be more, our faith can be a more positive influence in bridging our political divides. So John, we welcome you very graciously and the sharing of your wisdom and experience in light of your faith.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Trevor, for that very kind introduction. And thank everyone here on the screen for joining us here tonight for this discussion. I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to share some thoughts about the upcoming federal election and how people of faith, particularly Christians and particularly Roman Catholics, judging by the sponsors of this talk, should think about the choices in front of us. And I begin by saying, obviously, the fact it's a Jesuit forum, there's a certain Catholic or Christian lens, but in saying that, I'm not saying that other faith traditions don't have very, very important things to say about the intersection of faith and politics. But obviously, I'm looking at it from my own faith tradition and also the one that I'm involved with academically, working at Martin Luther University College. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Now, as we were getting organized for the webinar tonight, Stan said, well, John, you can talk for as long as you want, which is probably the most dangerous thing that's ever been said to a former politician. So I think what I'll do to not get into I can talk as long as I want is I'm going to show some slides tonight, if that's okay, more to just provide a framework for the talk. And then, of course, I'm delighted if people have general questions, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation in the breakout groups. So let me begin. I'm gonna share the slides here, and hopefully it works. So I'll ask Stan and others. It's working technologically here. That's great. Well, as I say, I want to thank Trevor for the kind introduction, and he obviously talked a lot about my background, but I thought maybe just to give you a little bit more of a context, I'd begin by talking about where I'm coming from in giving this presentation here tonight. As you heard, I actually spent about 20 years working in politics, and occasionally when I'm at Queen's Park or rarely if I'm on Parliament Hill, the odd person will stop me and say, didn't you used to be John Milloy? So I thought I'd begin with that question, who I was before I entered the world of academia. I am a former political activist. The point was made that I became interested in politics when I was about 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, as a page in the Ontario legislature. I got involved with the Liberal Party and was involved with the Young Liberals. I worked on a variety of campaigns at the local level, at the regional level. And then starting in 1993, I was actually involved in 3 federal campaigns working in the Central Campaign Office. The first one that elected Prime Minister Chrétien, and then 1997 and the year 2000, where I was actually part of the group that helped run the campaign in 2000. So I have lots of campaign experience. You heard that I worked as a political advisor, actually just out of undergrad. I worked at Queen's Park for a couple of years, then went on to graduate school and ended up, excuse me, following the 93 election, working on Parliament Hill, first for John Manley, who was Minister of Industry, then Stéphane Dion when he joined the cabinet when he was brought from Quebec to deal with the national unity crisis following the 1995 election. And from there, it was a bit of a springboard to work in the Prime Minister's office. And I had the pleasure of working for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien for about 5 years, and then thought, why not? I've worked for all these politicians all this time. What if I put my name on the ballot? And in 2003, I came home, and in 2003, I was elected as the member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, and served for about 11 years in the Ontario legislature. So that's who I was. At the same time, I was also a practicing Catholic. I was someone who found a great deal of solace and strength in my faith, but spent a lot of time trying to figure out that interplay between the political work that I was doing, both behind the scenes and then as a politician, and the role that my faith played, and also the role that faith played in general. And believe it or not, there's sort of a secret society, and maybe I shouldn't say that, it'll fuel some paranoia, but a quiet society within politics of politicians of faith, and not simply Roman Catholic or Christian, but politicians who find a great deal of strength from their faith, and also struggle with that question of what does it mean to be a politician who is a person of faith. So I was absolutely delighted when I retired from politics in 2014 that I was invited to think about that very question. And I was hired at Martin Luther University College, which was then Waterloo Lutheran Seminary, which is federated with Wilfrid Laurier University. And at Luther, I'm the director of the Center for Public Ethics. I'm also the assistant professor of public ethics. I teach a lot in the area of political theology, the interplay between politics and faith, and also public theology, sort of some broader questions around theology in the wider world. I'm also do some work in the area of political science, and I'm the practitioner in residence in the Department of Political Science at Laurier. So a lot of back and forth between the two. A lot of my students are political science students who are interested in the subject, perhaps from an academic point of view, but also are interested in because of their own faith, and they're trying to figure out how that interplays with their interest in politics. So in short, at Laurier or at Luther, I'm the politics and faith guy. And what I thought I'd do tonight, the politics and faith guy, I got to look at my cheat sheet. And as was mentioned, I'm the author of a short book from Novalis called Politics of Faith in a Polarized World, where I tried to share some of my thoughts, partly based on my experience as a former politician, political advisor, and also a little bit from the academic point of view, how that intersection works, particularly in our current polarized context that we're in. What really prompted me to write that book was the experience of the 2019 election. I know you've got to cast your mind way back pre-COVID, but in that election, if you remember, Andrew Scheer was the leader of the Conservative Party. Andrew Scheer is a devout Catholic, and it seemed to be great sport on the part of the media to go after him to say, well, what's your view on abortion? What's your view on a variety of LGBTQ issues? Aren't you just, a Catholic trying to impose your views on the rest of the world? And of course, the final, nail in his political coffin came a few weeks after the election, when he was asked in a press conference, do you think being gay is a sin? And actually, I start the book with that question, because I thought it so incensed me that this is what politics and faith in Canada had become, that it sort of prompted me to write this. And what incensed me were two things. First of all, the way a lot of the media, and God bless them, didn't understand faith. They didn't really understand the role that religion plays in someone's mind. It was simply, you're Catholic, so you must be homophobic and want to take away a woman's right to choose, would be their language. And then also, quite frankly, I was frustrated with Andrew Scheer and his inability to talk about his faith and how it informed his life and informed his role as a potential prime minister. So that's the book that prompted tonight's webinar, and perhaps we're going to be picking things up with a few more elections taking place And certainly faith has played a little bit of a role in this election, though not that big of one, with Prime Minister Carney. And what prompted that column that was cited earlier was the questions that were asked about his faith in the opening press conference. But anyway, to the topic at hand, the federal election, politics, and faith. And I thought I would start at the beginning. Why would a person of faith, especially a Christian, want to get involved in politics? And when I say get involved in politics, I'm not simply, I am talking about putting your name on the ballot, but I'm also talking about being an activist, and I'm talking about just engaging as a citizen, voting, expressing your views, engaging with politics. And I think the answers are fairly straightforward. And many on this call will be very familiar with them. The first is that obviously Christianity is about the other. There is a personal side to Christianity, but a lot of it is about how we deal with others, particularly those on the margins, the poor, the vulnerable, our neighbors, so to speak. And of course, politics is about how we organize ourselves collectively. There's an obvious overlap there. The second is, of course, we're called to build God's kingdom on earth as we head into the next few days leading into Easter. I think it's always important we remind ourselves that Christians are not a Good Friday people. We are Easter Sunday people. We are about Christ's resurrection and his charge to us to begin to build his kingdom on earth. And you can't begin to build God's kingdom on earth without thinking about how we organize ourselves both as a community, as a province, as a country, and once again running into politics. It's not exclusively, building God's kingdom is not exclusively about politics, but it certainly is an aspect. And then for Catholics, we have an explicit call to get involved, based very much on the two reasons that I've outlined. Pope Francis has written and spoken at length about this. And of course, Pope Francis always has such wonderful quotes, and he's called on Catholics to get their hands dirty and get involved in politics. So what is politics and governing? And don't worry, I'm not going to get into some sort of political science lecture here. I'm going to actually give you my impression, having worked in it both behind the scenes and then as a politician and a cabinet minister. And the first thing I'd say is politics and governing is about allocating scarce resources. One of the first things you realize when you're elected, or as I say, serving as an advisor, is how much demand is out there. Demand, obviously, for money and other financial resources, but also in terms of time and attention. And a government, it doesn't matter whether you're the further left government, the farthest right government, you've got to pick your battles, and there's only a few battles that you can pick. There's only a little bit of extra money that can go around, and you've got to decide where it goes. And I've got to tell you, I do not remember a single cabinet meeting where the discussion was, should we help poor homeless children or give tax cuts to the banks? That's not the type of discussions you have. There's so much need out there, and you've got to decide, does it go to cancer research, or does it go to a project that's going to help people living in an encampment, or is it going to go to an initiative that might help with the climate crisis? I mean, they are awful, horrible decisions you're always faced with, but resources are so small. And it's not just financial, it's also about time. There's limited time that you have in the legislature or the House of Commons. You can only move forward on so many initiatives. You can only tackle so many problems. And those of you who might be saying, well, wait a minute, can't you just raise taxes on the millionaires and the billionaires? Can't you just bring in regulations and rules to move forward? I've got to tell you, there are limits to that. There are limits to how much you can tax people. There's limits to how many rules you can put on people. And again, it doesn't matter if you're the farthest left government or the farthest right government. There is only so much you can do in the very, very short period that you're elected. So the first thing about politics and governing is allocating scarce resources. The second is managing. And we never talk about that very much, but it's just getting the day-to-day done. When you become a cabinet minister, I remember my first briefing, they said, well, this is our budget and this is what we spend it on long-standing items the government had commitments to, on sort of the day-to-day operations of the ministry. And then they finished the briefing, and they didn't seem to have much of a sense of humor, the public servants, because I said, what do I do? Because a lot of government is just dealing with making sure that the garbage gets collected, making sure that police officers get paid, making sure that this university gets its grant money, or schools get properly funded. A lot of it is just managing. And then the final is that you can get into power with the best mandate, with the best set of policies imaginable, and 2 planes can fly into the World Trade Center in New York City. You can start to hear about an illness in Wuhan, China, which seems to be spreading, or you can see the election of a president of the United States who starts talking about a 51st state. It's about dealing with the unforeseen. I think everyone, I should say everyone, but it's a very popular quote, of course, from Harold Macmillan, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, asked what's the worst thing about being Prime Minister, and he said events. And dealing with the unforeseen is a big part of your life, and no matter how much you plan, it's going to happen, and you're going to have to be nimble, and oftentimes you're going to have to fly a bit by the seat of your pants. So based on this definition, how do you assess the type of job a candidate or party would do if elected? And the order that I put them here is very, very important. You may be surprised that I don't say, okay, what's their platform? What are their policies? Because the fact is, although there are different policies between the parties running in this election, running in any election, there's also a lot of similarities. You'd also find that, particularly in the Canadian context, everyone's kind of on the right side of every issue. In my book, I tell the joke of, the politician was asked what's her position on crime, and she said she's against it. Most politicians I know, they're against crime, they're in favor of the environment, they think poverty is a bad thing. So it's not necessarily the platform and the policies. I would say it's the priorities. The party that you're going to vote for, the candidate that you're going to support, what are they going to focus on? Because they're going to be hit like a ton of bricks with all sorts of calls for action in terms of a variety of areas, many of them very, very important ones. They're going to have to make their choices. So what are their priorities? How can you figure that out? Well, it's a bit of a more of an art than a science, but I think you have to look at the history of the party and the candidate. You have to look at who they are, what sort of identity they've shown over the years. Look at their campaign rhetoric. What are they saying in their speeches? What are they saying in their commercials? What are they going to say in the debates that we're going to witness in the next few nights? Who are their friends? Who are their enemies? Every party has friends. Every party has enemies. Who do they side with in these fights? So it's trying to understand what's going to make this party tick if they get into power in terms of the areas they're going to focus on. Then you can move to the platform and the policies, and obviously you want to explore them. And there are differences, but you do find again that in Canada there may be a bit of a tendency to move to the center. So it's picking through and figuring out what's going to be at the forefront of what they move forward with. And then the final piece is the worldview. What worldview do they bring to the job? And my students have a lot of trouble with the idea of a worldview. They don't really understand what that means. So I try to give examples. There's a very legitimate worldview that says, look, you work hard, you follow the rules, and you get ahead. That's a very popular worldview. In fact, a lot of my students believe that. They're going to throw themselves into their work, and they're going to get ahead, and they're going to be successful. There are other worldviews that say, look, our society is rigged in favor of the rich and the powerful. And listen, folks, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how hard you work, particularly if you don't fit into that nice narrow group of sort of an older white male. You're never going to get ahead. There are dozens of different worldviews. Understanding how the world works. I like to give. I'm not going to give Canadian examples for obvious reasons, because my goal tonight is to think broadly, not to focus on one party or another. But think of Bernie Sanders. Love him or hate him, Bernie Sanders has a worldview. Bernie Sanders will tell you how the world works, about the billionaires and the millionaires and the billionaires on Wall Street, and how they manipulate the system, and how the little guy is constantly being shafted by the system, that sort of thing. And why is it important to understand the worldview? Well, to go back to the earlier slide, it's because planes do fly into buildings. It's because we do have pandemics. It's because we do have threats, external threats and internal threats. And how is this party or politician going to deal with them? Well, sometimes their priorities and the platform and policies are only going to lead you so far. You've got to think about how do they understand the world? How do they understand how to address the complexities that are out there? And you can start to understand what they would do, what would be their priorities. A politician whose worldview is very much about individual rights and freedoms above all things, if planes do fly into a building, if there is the threat of a terrorist attack, they're going to probably go a long way to try to help individuals or make sure that individuals' rights are not trampled. A different politician with a different worldview, you might see a different reaction as it goes forward. So obviously, you have to start assessing the type of job or candidate a party would do if elected. And then you have to think about your own priorities, your own policies, and your own worldviews. And in the spirit of tonight, you have to think about it from a Christian perspective. What should be a Christian's priorities, policies, and worldview? And of course, I think we all know there's no easy answer. There's no definitive answer. I can't sit here tonight and say that a certain policy plank or a certain policy platform aligns 100% with a Christian's priorities, policies, and worldview. But there are some cues. So what I talk about is some of the underlying Christian principles that all of us need to think about as we assess, as we come to terms with how we're going to approach this election, about what our priorities and policies and worldviews should be as Christians. And I'm going to do three because I thought it was sort of fun tonight that I have three on every slide or most slides. And of course, there's many, many more. But there is the idea of the common good. The idea that governing and politics can't be about one group over another. It has to be about bringing forward policies and approaches that are going to help everyone. And again, going back to my classroom experience, I talk about the common good, and everyone says, yeah, move on. They all seem to think they understand it. But I've got to tell you, spend a little time in elected life. Start bringing up issues like poverty, and what you'll hear from political advisors are poverty is not a political issue. The poor don't vote. The poor, in fact, are seen by the middle class often, though they won't admit it, as sort of a hindrance that needs to be dealt with. What we need are policies that deal with the middle class, because the middle class vote, and the middle class is where you gain your power. You've got to fight that in terms of the common good. The second is the idea of solidarity. Again, the idea that all of us are made in God's image, and we need to find ways to support each other. And solidarity, of course, means with everyone. It means the person who's sleeping in a homeless encampment. It means the refugee who's trying to get into Canada, who's being denied entry, or even just the immigrant looking for a better life who's being denied entry. And it also means the trucker who in the early 2022 thought that the best way to express their frustration was to go to Parliament Hill and take it over. So it is the idea of seeing God in the other, of respecting the other, and moving forward. And finally, the stewardship of creation, our responsibility for the environment and for creation, and that it can't be conveniently put aside when it really doesn't fit the flavor of the day. So your job, obviously, our job as people of faith, is to think about these underlying principles, try to think about how they inform or create a Christian informed or Catholic informed set of priorities, policies, and worldviews. But there are three things to keep in mind as you apply them to any election campaign. The first, and this of course is what makes it very complicated, is there are different paths to the same end. There are no easy answers. Someone who says, look, we've got to invest in research and development and help the business community to create wealth, which in turn can help those on the margins, I think has as legitimate a point, or as legitimate a point for discussion as someone who's saying we need to invest billions into a basic income and finally give those living in poverty the dignity they need. We have to beware of utopianism. And that's part of Catholic teaching, that there are no answers that are going to solve every problem. Every political party is going to put forward its set of policies. Many of them are going to be flawed. Many of them aren't going to be particularly thought through. And I guarantee you, absolutely none of them are going to solve all the problems facing our world. And anyone who tries to convince you of that, and people don't talk in that stark a term saying, I have all the answers, but I've got to tell you, there have been times over the last few years when there have been voices out there saying the system is flawed because of X, Y, or Z, and if we adopt this policy, everything will change overnight and all will be well. Well, that sort of utopianism is not part of a faith approach to an election campaign. And then the final one is that policy problems are much more complex than any party presents in an election campaign. To gain people's attention, you have to simplify things, and all of us have to take all the policies and platforms that we have with a bit of a grain of salt and dig down a bit deeper and understand that no matter who's in power, they're going to fall short with what they bring forward. Three more things to keep in mind. This is about making choices in an imperfect world full of imperfect people. No political party or candidate is going to represent everything that you're searching for. And remember, this is about discernment through a faith lens, and faith involves sacrifice, responsibility, and the giving of oneself. I will be brutally honest here. The tariff situation, obviously, I've been watching it very closely. I've kind of thought, well, isn't that awful if people get laid off? And then all of a sudden the stock market collapses, and me being of a certain age and having certain funds saved for retirement, all of a sudden it became very real to me because it affected me. We can't just stop with what affects me or what affects us. We have to think of our responsibility for others. We have to think about people living in the homeless encampment. We have to think about the environment. We have to think about a whole variety of issues, and we have to come to that unfortunate conclusion that we may be voting in a way that's going to force us to pay a little bit more in taxes, that's going to see regulations which might change our lifestyle in a negative way, that's going to require us to give of ourselves. Because Christian discernment isn't simply about what affects me, it's about what affects us. And then finally, there's a huge unknown factor in governing, and I think there is room to reflect on the character and the worldview of those who put their name on the ballot. They are going to be forced with very, very tough decisions that we can't even anticipate. I remember working for Prime Minister Chrétien. What the short story I'm going to tell is in the public domain. I'm not breaking any great national security secrets, but after September 11th, a day or two after, I had a meeting with him, and we started to talk about the events that took place. And he told me about being contacted by the Chief of Defense Staff because some of you may remember this, it's been in the media. There was a Korean airliner that would not respond, and they thought might actually crash into a city. And the Prime Minister had to give permission whether the military, if necessary, could shoot it down. Luckily, they made contact. Nothing came of it. But I still remember him telling me that story. And again, it has been in the media. I'm not breaking national security secrets here. But just thinking the profound decision-making that Prime Minister Chrétien had, that any Prime Minister has. And I think it is important to think about that, that no matter who is elected, they are going to be faced with some very, very serious decisions that none of us, I imagine, on this call could even begin to think about how much it will weigh on us to move forward. So it's something to keep in mind as you're doing the discernment. So what about the hot button issues? What about going back? I began by referencing Mr. Scheer, and certainly the discussion about Mr. Carney's faith, which kicked off the election, was about abortion. And when I tell people that I work on the issue of faith, or I've written a book about Catholicism and politics, they immediately say, "Oh, you're interested in abortion," because for a lot of people, these types of discussions begin and end with the hot button issues. So, a couple of things I can share, and certainly there's lots of opportunity for more discussion. An election's not a referendum. If on April the 28th we were having a ballot which said, "Are you in favor of medical assistance in dying being allowed in Canada?" we might be having a very, very different discussion tonight. But there's no referendum going on in terms of hot button issues. The parties will talk about them perhaps slightly differently about their degree of tolerance within their ranks or within their caucus. But at the end of the day, none of these hot button issues are really election issues. And no matter who you vote for, it's not really about these issues. To what extent do we meet the world where it is when it comes to these issues? We live in a democracy. There's a certain acceptance around issues like abortion and now medical assistance in dying within society, and the idea that an election is going to magically change that is not going to happen. And then the final piece, which a lot of this comes from the book that we referenced at the beginning, is the answer to every moral problem a law? Is our laws in some of these areas even feasible to think about? What would they look like? Or are there other ways to talk about it? And certainly there's theologians, individuals much smarter than me, who will talk about things like a consistent ethic of life, who will talk about how important it is to have policies and approaches that, if we're talking about life issues, that deal with life at all issues. And perhaps that involves more palliative care, more emphasis on end of life. Perhaps that involves more support for women so that they do have a full choice as they move forward. So, a word or two on the hot button issues, which certainly have already crept up and may creep up again. So finally, I couldn't, I have two more slides, but I couldn't resist saying, what does this have to do with tariffs? This is the strangest election I've ever seen. It's all about tariffs, and nothing else seems to get any airtime. So, listen, from a faith perspective, tariffs are an important issue, but they're not the only issue. And we can't forget about the environment, poverty, homelessness, immigration. These are all issues that should be of great concern to all of us, and a particular concern to Christians and Catholics. The other thing is that if we are going to talk about tariffs, it obviously leads to the question of addressing Canada's economic vulnerability. Every single party is saying we have to do it. But the question I think that people of faith have to ask is it going to be done in a way that respects everyone, that respects the poor, that respects the marginalized, that respects our environment, and that these are top of mind as we talk about reimagining Canada, the type of reimagination which, as I say, I think we all agree we're being forced to because of the situation in the United States. And finally, I think it's very much acceptable to love your country out of a sense of responsibility for what we've created for the community. But I think as Christians, we have to be wary of adopting a sense of superiority or failing to recognize a sense of solidarity with others, no matter who they are or where they live. And certainly I've heard some pretty outrageous things said, certainly obviously about Mr. Trump and people around him, but just about Americans in general and about the United States. And I think we need to be very, very careful. And on that note, I'm going to end with my final slide, which is really about civil discourse during this election season. Christians are called to humility. Favorite quote I have lots of favorite quotes from Pope Francis, but he talks about finding the other side's share of the truth. Yes, there are moments where things are so outrageous they need to be called out. But for the most part, all of us are struggling. All of us are broken individuals, and I think we've got to recognize that every side has a share of the truth. and we have to be respectful to those. We're all made in the image of God, and 99% of politicians, in my experience, are seeking public office for the right reasons. And even if there's a political party that you despise, you would never vote for, if it was the last party on earth, I think you've got to respect those individuals. You've got to respect the fact that the leader and the members of the party have put their name on the ballot and put themselves out there, and show them the respect that they deserve, recognize that they have a perspective worth considering, and certainly approach elections with a degree of understanding, love of neighbor, and also a degree of civility. So there, I went on longer than I intended, but I didn't use up all the 2 hours. So with that, I think what I do is stop sharing my understanding and turn the floor back to others to I guess lead to the next part of the session. So thanks again, and I really do look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, John. That was really good. And thank you for the slides as well. It allows everyone to process what you're saying better for us visual learners. So for a little bit of time before we break up into small groups, what we have been in the practice of doing is leaving it some time for any questions or responses to John, or while what he has shared with us is still fresh in our minds, before we break up into small groups. And then we'll have time after in the plenary to, if there are any further questions or observations, but just some initial responses from people or a question. And you can put up your hand in the usual way. Monica.
Yes. Hi, John. Thank you for that. That was a really great overview. I'm just thinking about politics today versus politics when you had a lot of your experience. And it seems like we've really lost the space for a lot of elected MPs, MPPs, MLAs to vote with their conscience, to put their efforts, as you've described, into things that, correspond with their worldview. It seems that members of legislatures are being whipped in ways like never before. I hope everybody knows what I mean by that. Being brought into line to vote in certain ways, not whipped, but and just leaders making pronouncements that all members of his party or all members that are standing for election will vote in a certain way, think a certain way. I have worked in the UN scene a lot, and I can tell you that a lot of the policy changes that were happening under the Trudeau government, for good reasons, had a lot of really negative unintended consequences, or maybe they were intended consequences, I don't know, because it was so rigid. Like we were just brought into line, and if you were not in that lineup, you were excluded, you lost funding, you lost access, you lost everything. And we're seeing it to the max right now with Trump and his punishment and his revenge. And so I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit. Do you see those changes, or is it just me as like listening to the news and watching it from the outside? Is that what's really happening inside? That people are losing their freedom to be the best they can be as an elected member of the legislature? What's your take on that? Thank you.
Sure. No, I mean, that's an excellent question. And the short answer is yes, I think that is the trend. And partly it's the nature of politics has become much more negative, and or for negative reasons, I guess I'm trying to say, for negative reasons. And there is, I think, an interest in having power and being powerful and that sort of thing. So, I will certainly acknowledge that, but there's another side to it, which is the complexities of the system, the complexities of the world, the complexities of the problems that we're dealing with don't allow for the type of horizontal decision-making that maybe happened in the past. The 24-hour news cycle, the rise of social media, you need a level of control. And believe it or not, that control, even though you hear in the media oftentimes, you know, backbenchers and others, even cabinet ministers complaining about the level of control, I often found many times they were looking for that control. The world is so chaotic. There needs to be someone who's sort of holding things together and moving forward. I remember, you know, as House Leader, there were private members' bills which were technically free votes, and they were Thursday afternoons, and people would come to me as House Leader and say, "How are we voting?" And so we can vote whatever way you want. And they say, "Yeah, but how should I vote?" I mean, people were looking for that direction because it is so complicated, and the issues they cross departments and ministries and levels of government, and you have reporters breathing down your neck and not willing to cut anyone any slack, and the rise of social media. And so I think within all that chaos, part of the way to manage that chaos has been to have very strict controls on members of parliament, members of provincial parliament. The other issue is us. I got to tell you, most critiques of politics these days lead to the mirror. You know, the fact is, I never remember knocking on doors, someone saying, "I'm going to vote for the party. I'm going to vote for a particular party because they cooperate so well with the government." No, you vote for the party because they contrast with the government. And we've seen, certainly in the United Kingdom, there were, you know, the Liberal Democrats joined with the Conservatives in a coalition government. The next time around, you know, the Conservatives did very well. The Liberal Democrats were almost wiped out. Even in this, I'm not trying to be partisan here, but we've seen the New Democrats, who did work very closely with the Liberals, are slipping in the polls. So, you know, the fact that voters talk about cooperation and talk about how important it is for everyone to work together and work things through, and yet we don't reward it, is a real concern. So part of it's the chaos. Part of it, I think, is that whether we like it or not, voters tend to reward a lot of the kind of the very negative criticisms that go forward. And then part of it is the nature of politics. I think there are some real problems in the amount of power that's certainly centralized in the Prime Minister's office, the Premier's office, and hopefully we can find ways to deal with that. But you know, it's a very real problem.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Monica, for the question. Anyone else? Ava.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to hear your views on the relation between politics and political decisions as responsible or as generators, generating some of the troubles or problems you mentioned, homelessness, increase of migrants, refugees, impoverishment. That's my question.
Sorry, just your question is what sort of the things to think about?
Yes, about the relation that the politics and political decisions they have with the generating impoverishment or generating homelessness or generating the growing waves of refugees around the world.
Yeah.
Because I listen that it is like an active action responding, no? And thinking on all these troubles and situations, issues. But what is the relation of these political decisions, or all these political positions as generators or as responsibles generating these kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean, they're complicated issues, and I think it is legitimate to say that the voices that are calling for direct action, that are calling for things like basic income or you know, huge amounts of money into supportive housing or welcoming more refugees, that sort of thing. Yeah, obviously that has a direct appeal. You say, okay, as a Christian, we're to welcome the stranger, we're to deal with those living in poverty. So I think that has a direct appeal and it aligns. But at the same time, as the minister in charge of Minister of Community and Social Services dealing with poverty, These are complex issues, and I think it's also legitimate. Other voices that talk about, I'm not necessarily going to espouse this, but other voices that talk about different ways to approach this, whether you're talking about the debate over safe injection sites, the degree to which someone should be forced to go into treatment. The whole idea of Canada should be a welcoming country to refugees and immigrants, but at the same time, we need to be able to support them with our systems moving forward. All I'm trying to say is there's a debate going on, and I think as Christians, it's really important to listen to all sides, and that although there may be that immediate attraction to someone who says, well, we people living in poverty will find a way to enhance them financially directly. That's one perspective, but there are other perspectives. But part of it is moving through the noise and moving through the slogans. The most frustrating thing about politics, I find, are the slogans, are the simple answers to complex questions, and you hear it from both sides. And it's about understanding them. It's about, as part of the discerning process, exploring some of the background on issues, getting the facts on issues, and also understanding if you come with a certain attraction to a certain set of policies, what do the critics say about those policies? And we tend not to do that very often. I mean, it's really interesting when I hear I'll pick a tariff issue. When I hear about interprovincial barriers, and everybody, we got to get rid of interprovincial barriers. We got to get rid of interprovincial barriers. And I'm going to vote for the politician who's going to get rid of interprovincial barriers. You know what my question is why do they exist in the first place? And I bet you'd find there are some legitimate reasons why they exist in the first place, probably some illegitimate reasons, I use that, but I think it's understanding it. So I think in terms of the situation around poverty, in terms of immigration, in terms of welcoming refugees, I think these are huge issues. I think as Christians, we've got to say who's going to make them a priority. What are some of the policies? But we also have to explore those policies, because oftentimes they're not as well thought through as we might think.
Thank you, John, for that, and Ava for the question, and Tara, and then Malcolm. And then those would be the last two questions for this portion. Then we'll move into our small group. So Tara, and then Malcolm.
My question is actually inspired by Father Peter's question around were you often lobbied or approached by churches and other faith-based groups? And my question is if you can comment on the corporate lobby.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't see that. So now I'm reading it. That was that was. So you're asking about the corporate lobby?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are very influential businesses and organizations that are out there, and I won't entirely sugarcoat it and say that there aren't people who know what they're doing and hire the right people and certainly know how to donate well to a campaign and that sort of thing. That exists, but I would say more importantly, you listen to those who you need to listen to be a responsible representative. When I was a representative for Waterloo Region, I was the sole government representative. I was a member of cabinet. At that point, Research in Motion, the BlackBerry company, employed 8,000 people directly. And there were tons of suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. And they were one of the leading companies in Canada. They had put Canada on the map. And I freely admit that if the owner or the head of BlackBerry, there were two co-CEOs, they made movies, if a co-CEO of BlackBerry called me, I took his call and I tried to help him. And yeah, I probably tried to help him a little bit more than someone I had never met before who, was perhaps just phoning with a random question or a random moving forward. So you know, a lot of it is driven by the importance of that person to your community. One of the areas, though, that I've always been consistently calling for is reform of political fundraising. And you know, we've taught, well, we've lowered limits, we've done this, we've done that. There's always ways around it. And unfortunately, fundraising is a big part of a politician's job. It shouldn't be. And you know what? Someone who consistently writes big checks to me, also, yeah, the head of BlackBerry gets their call answered, as does someone who consistently writes a big check. So I'd certainly like to see it. I'm not saying there's a corruption. I think it's just human nature. Someone who's sort of become a political friend and supporters of yours is going to get the calls. But you look at what Quebec, I believe, you know, there's $100 limit and things like that. And I think a lot more subsidies from taxpayers, which drive some people crazy. I've had fights with people over it. Would go a long way, so the politicians could just focus on their communities and focus on their jobs. So I think the political fundraising could do it, but I've never found it to be sort of Hollywood always. I've got to tell you, watch Veep. Veep is a lot more like politics than the Hollywood movies where you know the lobbyist gives you a big envelope of cash. No lobbyist ever gave me a big envelope of cash as it went through. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm answering the questions far too long. I'll try to be shorter. So
Okay, good. Thank you, John and Tara. Malcolm. Oh, you're muted, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful overview you gave us at the beginning, John. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of the one aspect of life today globally, which complexifies our world, and it's the multi-faith dimension, interfaith, intercultural dimension. Particularly every major city in the world, even minor cities, have got people of all faiths there. So when it comes to local politics or world politics, national politics, you have one has to consider the various worldviews brought in by religions. Which, faith means the politics and faith in a polarized world. I would say in a multicultural, multi-faith polarized world. The polarization now we sense more than ever before. Has it to do with the digital age in which we live, and has that complexified things more? And even more, like for example, let's take a case, the case of Gaza. How would you see it? I mean, people tend to look at it either one way or another. It's either you're for Gaza, or for Israel, for the Palestinians, or for the Israelis. But then the Palestinians comprise people of three different faiths, if not more, like Jews, Christian, Muslims, and Bedouins you have. And well, you know, and so one takes a position. Sometimes religion is involved, but there's that complexifies it more. Could you please say something about the multi-faith aspect of our topic today?
yeah, I mean, you obviously, I mean, you've given a good example where the idea, I mean, forget consensus, the idea of even having a discussion is often impossible. But I guess I'll take us. I mean, I'll just say a few quick things about sort of the multi-faith dimension of, call it our society or our communities. You know, a colleague of mine, I think I even say this in the book, he always jokes and says, interfaith dialogue, what are we going to talk about? I've always been one, I've certainly very much encouraged dialogue over issues, but I've also encouraged action. In my experience, getting groups together, particularly groups where there's a lot of tension, to focus their energy on something, whether it's you know, we've you have seen those wonderful stories in the media where a mosque and a synagogue get together to sponsor a refugee family, where you know, out of the cold or poverty program is run by a number of different faith groups who may not always have the same worldview or the same perspective moving forward. I think oftentimes that idea of going out and dealing with some of the basics with the most vulnerable, with providing them the basics moving forward, can oftentimes be a starting point for dialogue. There are areas of common ground in terms of simply caring for those that are in need in our community and our society, and I think sometimes that can be a way of moving forward. But part of it in terms of the polarization that's going on, and listen, I know the emotions on some of these issues, particularly the Middle East, are sort of off the charts, but I think it is everyone having a degree of humility and trying to understand a little bit where the other side's coming from, and trying to, each side cut each other a little bit of slack in terms of moving forward. And certainly, when it comes to the classroom, I'm always encouraging students to at least get their facts straight. And by facts, there's a lot of opinion, but there are some things that are verifiable. And also, again, and I'm repeating myself what I just said a second or two ago, trying to understand where is it the other side's coming from as you move forward. But none of that is to say there are any panaceas out there. But when it comes to interfaith, I sometimes think the idea of action, the idea of trying to improve society and move that way, and finding those points of common ground can make a bit of a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, and Malcolm, for the question, and bringing up the multi-faith dimension as well. Not just faith is not only relegated to focused on Christian, especially in being in Canada. So I'm sure there could be more questions, and I have a question or two, but I'm going to refrain. Maybe I'll have a chance in the plenary. Which is fast approaching. So we're going to go into small groups, and we're not going to have much time, like our usual time, just a little over half an hour, 35 minutes or so. So we do have 3 sets of questions that you would have received in the email reminders. You do not have to answer all the questions. That's not the idea. It's just maybe picking 1 or 2 within those sets that resonates with you and sharing on that aspect of. And the 3 questions are thematically organized. First question is around what struck you from what you heard in the sharing of John, what resonated with you. And then the second question, the set of questions, is related to our environment of political division, and how we contribute to it, and how we can, refrain from it. And then the third set of questions is the role of faith specifically upon our political dispositions and choices. So, a facilitator will read the questions, and then we'll kind of go around in a circle, as most of us are familiar with. Imagine we're in person, we're sitting in a circle, and it's really not so much a sharing circle, although it is that, but it's just as importantly, if not more important, it's a listening circle. It's a listening circle. We're listening to each other in a structured conversation. Imagine that the speaker in the circle is holding a talking stick or a sacred feather in the Indigenous traditions. And that person, we are listening to that person for 2 or 3 minutes on the question. And then we go around in a facilitated way. So, and it's confidential. So we strive to make a safe space in which to share and listen, especially around political issues. So please do honor that. And it's a prayerful space in which to share and listen as well. So with that, I think Stan is going to break us up into, I guess, only 2, maybe, 2 groups, I imagine.
Yes, 2 groups, exactly. Mm-hmm. And we'll meet back here in 35 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the main session, to the plenary session. Is everyone back? We might have lost 1 or 2 people in the way, but that's okay. So now So my name is Stanislas Levavalier. I work with Trevor at the Jesuit Forum, and we are now going to have a plenary session. And this is an opportunity to share about what the highlights were in the listening circles. So if you have anything you want to kind of share about what touched you, if you have additional questions for John as well, please take the time to share them with us. And you can either do that by raising your hands or by typing in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. Does anyone want to share anything about what happened in the small groups?
Or any questions, for John? Oh, we have.
Monica?
Yes, I can share a little bit from our group. What came out was a theme that, and I hope I do this justice. So if I misrepresent my group, please jump in. But it seemed that there were a few of us sharing on this similar theme of some of these issues that we're dealing with today are way bigger than what our political system and our democracy, the way we have it set up, can handle. Like Indigenous reconciliation and like those very core issues about treaties and non-treaties, climate change, like really polarized issues that are like forcing their way in, that are impossible to kind of move out of the way. Like somebody, one of our group members is actually from the US and was sharing about the role that abortion as an issue played in his own experience with the Catholic Church in the recent election, in terms of like moving people to vote in a certain way. So that kind of polarization just kind of dominated it. Just there wasn't space for anything else, and we were suspecting that that might be the case in other experiences across the country in the US. So, anyways, the theme is, what do we do about these issues that's like we seem ill-equipped to handle, things that need like very, very complex. So you talked about complexity, but there are some things that are just like uber complex. And how do we, are we able to deal with that with the system as it is now? What are your thoughts on that, looking at the future?
Was that was that directed as a question? Because I don't want to hijack you. I've had lots of time, but Mona, you want me to respond then?
I think so, yeah. Unless others in my group want to jump in and say something.
No, I think, I mean, a couple of things. I think it's an excellent point. I mean, listen, one of the opportunities that we have with I raised the issue of internal trade barriers, and we have to figure out why they're there in the first place before you can talk about them, and that, but which I think is legitimate. But the flip side is that there is a moment that we have right now in this country to rethink how we deal with issues. Federalism, this is sort of where everyone falls asleep, but the division between federal and provincial doesn't make a lot of sense. Everybody's getting involved in others. The role of cities now, which are creations of the province, but at the same time play such a huge role in our governing. Is this an opportunity for us to think about rejigging the system and allowing for decision making? I mean, there has to be accountability in decision making, but a different type of decision making. And I think there are some voices out there saying, yeah, things are so crazy right now that to never, the old expression, never let a good crisis go to waste, that there may be ways to rejig it. So Canada's system is not particularly nimble, and it's not particularly well suited for the modern era. So that's one thing. Second thing is to go back maybe to the original premise of the discussion today. The church's teaching on some of these things. It's not about and we fall into this trap sometimes, letting government handle everything. We're not. We have a responsibility. Everyone on this screen has a responsibility to deal with some of these issues. And the people affected have a responsibility too. I mean, there's finding that balance where We create opportunities for individuals. We work with individuals. We accompany individuals. And there is sometimes, I think, particularly I find this with a lot of students, well, I'm a Christian. I want to help the poor. The government better go help the poor. I'm gonna go lobby the government to help the poor. I'm gonna go look for there, as opposed to saying, what can we do in terms of our community? So sometimes these issues are so big that it's counterintuitive, but they can only be dealt with in small chunks at a community basis by us working together. So there are just two observations.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Monica.
And I'll just add, in our group, a couple of things were brought up for us, I think, for us to be mindful of. One is the international ramifications of our political choices, that, our political dispositions are not just within our borders, our national sovereign borders, but they have international ramifications. And I think of, like, I'll just put it out there, the effect of U.S. aid and development throughout the world as a result of the U.S. election, which people didn't really see coming, but many wouldn't be surprised either. But that's just one small but consequential, So our political choices are not just Canadian, they have international ramifications. And the other thing that was brought up too in our group was really kind of what do we mean, with polarization? Means, we can disagree with others. That's what campaigns are for. That's what discussions are for with friends and colleagues. We can disagree, but it's the nature of our disagreement. It's is our disagreement, does disrespect enter into it? So we can advocate for, we can be advocates for, political advocates, but how are we, can we continue to have a relationship in our discourse? I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on that or
Thank you, Trevor.
add something new.
I actually wanted to share something about our group as well, and something that Monica, sorry, Monica, maybe I should not put you on the spot, but there was an interesting kind of a group of comments about the fact that, and it was related to the point that John made about the fact that, hot button issues, sometimes they are somehow in the way because, there's not a law for everything and so on. And so maybe we get fixated on those, whereas maybe what we're called to is simpler choices, or maybe not simpler, but kind of more practical choices. And in some ways as well, like polarization, if we want to react to it, if we want to contract it, maybe it's in the way of us having the simple discernment we're supposed to have. I mean, not necessarily simple again, but the personal discernment we're supposed to have. And in some ways, with some of your quotes, John, in the presentation, you did give us some tools in conversation to kind of disable those traps by saying, well, election is not a referendum. And so that's it. We don't have to, fight of this right now and find that we can't even discuss. Let's focus on what we are really called to discern. And let's make the choices, according to our faith, our own discernment, but the choices we're called to. And let's not get trapped by a too big a picture. And I thought that was very interesting. Does anyone else have another comment? Because I think we're almost at the end, actually, but maybe there's room for another line.
No, it's a personal conclusion after this interchange ideas and opinions. It is like reconfirm how our faith, our Christian identity is very linking with the political life and decisions and options that we take. No, so it is maybe it's because my culture and my sometimes people feel that there are two different things, and that political decisions or political situations are in a different way than the Christianity or the Catholic faith. And thank you for do this, because all the three meetings has been really rich and joyful, and also to me teach a lot, and to understand better the relation between faith and between the civil and the political responsibility we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ava. Maybe we'll look ahead now. In conclusion, I just want to share with you a couple of things. I'm going to put in the chat a link to an interview with Pam Palmater. She's an Indigenous lawyer, professor at Metropolitan Museum, formerly Ryerson in Toronto. And it's just from a few days ago. And Pam is talking about the effects of the election campaigns, potential effects on Indigenous communities. So I think that's really another important aspect of our political discernment. It's about an hour long, and it's really good. Although it is partisan in some points, so I'm sure you won't be surprised. But it's really instructive of the different, particularly around the renewed energy around resource extraction and speeding up the process. And how will that affect Indigenous communities? And do they have a say? That's just one part of the conversation. So I think it's you'll really find that fruitful, I hope, because we can't forget our need for continued truth and reconciliation in the midst of this campaign, though we don't talk about it much. And then just looking ahead, I'm going to share my screen. Most of you know this, of our coming events coming up. On May 6th, we are going to be joined by Joe Gunn and talking about his book that's a few years old now, but just revisiting his book on Journeys to Justice, Reflections on Canadian Christian Activism. And just a kind of way to revisit examples of Christian people rooted in their faith, working towards equity and social justice in Canadian society. And we'll be joined by Joe Gunn on that. I think that will be really a Christian witness. And then on June 10th, we're going to be looking at the book Structures of Indifference, An Indigenous Life and Death in a Canadian City, which is Winnipeg, of how Indigenous peoples in Canadian urban centers, not just urban centers, how they fall through the cracks, in particular in the healthcare system. And we're going to be joined by Nigon James Sinclair, who is from Winnipeg, teaches at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. So he'll give us help us shed some insight on this reality that Indigenous peoples face. And so that's in June. We're going to be in the process of organizing other events, but not as frequently as the last month, because we've had a lot of forums because within the context of the election. So please join us for those. Stay tuned for further information. But just in conclusion, coming back to this evening, thank you, John, for a really fruitful and interaction, especially in the context of our federal election, which is fast upon us. Hopefully, we all feel more in a discerning spirit, entering into the final days of the election. So thank you, John, for your wisdom and your experience and sharing that with us. And I'm sure we're all very grateful for you. So thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
So with that,
Have a good-
good night, everyone. Hope to see you in the future in further forums. And stay tuned for the recording after if you want to share it with others. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.